Hello everybody and welcome back. Today we will have a closer look at Riverpod and how to use it. As you may have noticed or read in the documentation, Riverpod is just an anagram of provider, so it's the next step in solving some of the problems you may have with provider. I will shortly motivate why I suggest you use Riverpod with Riverpod Generator. Here you will find a list of different providers provided by Riverpod. Without much experience, it might be difficult to choose the right provider for your problem, for your state, for your controller, for your repository. By using the generator, you don't have to understand the pros and cons and the concepts of each of those providers. All you have to think about is, do you want to use the functional or the class-based concept? Basically, do you want to expose or provide a state with methods to change this state? So you're in the class-based area, or you just have one method or one value to expose. And then you have a look if it is synchronously, or is it a future, is asynchron, or it's a stream. That's all you have to think about. And here it might be useful to have a look at the stream provider itself to understand if you're not familiar with streams or do not know when to use a stream and when to use a future. It basically says if you have a stream of values, because like Firebase gives you new values every time, or you ask repeatedly for a new value like the current weather, or are there any new posts or messages? So if you expecting many changes, or so whenever you have a stream of values, then you go for the stream provider. And then you will have a look here. Here in this blog article, you also find a good description of the generator, but we will just use it. So that's for the motivation. It's basically easier to use the generator and you have to write less code. So for Flutter app, you will have to use the Flutter Riverpod package. As I said, I suggest you use the generator, so you will need the Riverpod generator. And the generator, to be able to generate something, needs the annotation. So you also need Riverpod annotation. So you will need to add those dependencies. And to use the generator, you also need those in the dev dependencies. Everything is well documented. So just follow the instructions. So provider in Riverpod is everything about state and listening to changes and updating the view accordingly. So to be able to use Riverpod, we use consumer widget instead of stateless widget, and we use consumer stateful widget instead of stateful widget. If we do so, we get an additional parameter, the ref parameter. And with the ref parameter, we have access to all providers of our application. In most cases, you will watch changes of state, and that's the method you have to call watch. In some cases, if you want to have access to the repository, for example, you will need ref read. So you just read the provider's value once. You're not interested into changes. In some cases, you're interested in the previous value and in the new state value. If this is required, you may use the method listen. That's all we need for now to use Riverpod in our counter example. Here we have our consumer widget, and because of this, we have in the build method the additional parameter ref, and we can access all the providers of our application using the annotation Riverpod with a small r, and running in a terminal the command dart run build runner watch to watch for any changes and let the Riverpod generator do its work. So whenever I change something here, the generated file will be updated automatically. And if there are any problems, you will see it here. It takes some time for the first start, later on it's very quick. And of course, as always, if you have generated files, you have to put the name of this other part of the functionality which is generated as a part command here in your file. So where to find this generated file? It's basically the same name as you are working it now, and then .g.dart generated. And as usual, if you work with generators, you have to follow some naming conventions. So if I implement a controller, I name the class, for example, counter, and then I have to write extends, underline, $, and then the same name again. Now, I always need to override the build method, and the data type returned by the build method is the data type of your state. So if you have just one value, like in the counter example, you will return an int. If you have a more complex state, you will return an object with the information of this state. In addition, you may implement further methods, as in the controller. There are methods how I may change the state. In this example, it's just an increment. So I change the state, and the state is an int value as it's stated here. So I can simply write state ++. You may try to understand the generated file, but you don't have to. This is the provider we may use. So in our screen, I suggest at the beginning, you write always what is your state, where to find your state. So in this case, it's the counter provider I'm looking for. And the controller are the methods to change the state. And that's in counter provider notifier. That's all the magic of Riverpod. And as I said, you might debug it and try with go to definition to understand it. And if you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. But for now, we're just using it. And the difference is we have a state, it's just the counter provider. And we have the access to the methods with counter provider.notifier. And here we have the difference. For accessing those methods, we are not interested in any changes. We just need access to those methods. That's why we can just read it once. And for the app itself, for the screen, we want to update the screen, the widgets, in case of any changes of the state. So here we show the value of the state, which is an int value. So we can simply write $state to access the value, to access the state. And on press of the floating action button, we call the increment method of our controller. That's all we need. So we use this class-based approach, and we follow the naming convention such that the generator may generate the providers we need. So that's all for the quick introduction of using Riverpod and the generator with a simple counter example. Whenever you use the generator, make sure this build runner is watching and running in the background. And of course, for this simple example, you do not necessarily need the provider and Riverpod approach, but we start simple. And in the next video, we will have a look at accessing a simple REST API to add and read and change data in the backend. See you then. Bye-bye.